What if death is not the end, but a threshold, not a moment of vanishing, but of becoming? This question, ancient, urgent, and deeply human, has stirred the hearts of philosophers, mystics, and seekers for millennia. We bury it in silence. We cover it with rituals, with beliefs, with fear, or with denial. But death remains. It lingers at the edges of every heartbeat, every goodbye, every mirror we avoid. And yet it also beckons, not only with dread, but with mystery. In this video, we will explore how four great minds, Socrates, the Buddha, Martin Heidegger, and Rumi, dared to look at death without flinching. They came from different worlds, spoke different languages, lived in distant centuries. Yet each of them confronted the same silence, and each found meaning within it. What they offer us is not doctrine, it is not certainty. It is a kind of wisdom, a compass for those willing to look inward and to live in the light of their own mortality. Through the philosophical, the spiritual, the existential, and the mystical, these thinkers offer us not answers, but mirrors. Mirrors that don't erase fear, but reflect it with clarity. Mirrors that ask us, are you awake to your life, or just passing through? To reflect on death is not morbid, it is to return again and again to the essential. And perhaps in doing so to discover that life, real life, begins where illusion ends. For Socrates, death was not a tragedy. It was a release from the weight of the body, from the fog of the senses, from the distractions that keep the soul from truth. He believed the soul longed for clarity, and as long as it remained bound to the physical world, to pain, pleasure, and opinion, it could never see clearly. Death, then, was not a punishment. It was a homecoming. In his final hours, as described in Plato's Phaedo, Socrates speaks not with fear, but with serenity. To his disciples, grieving and confused, he offers not comfort, but a challenge, to live each day as if it were preparation for death. Not through denial or despair, but through the pursuit of wisdom, of justice, of inner harmony. To be a philosopher for Socrates was to learn how to die, and in learning how to die, to learn how to live rightly. He considered two possibilities: that death is a dreamless sleep, peaceful, undisturbed, eternal, or that it is a journey, a migration of the soul to a place where one might meet the wise and just who came before. In either case, he saw no cause for fear, for what is to be feared is not death itself, but a life unexamined. And it was this, the unexamined life, that he called unworthy of a human being. For the Buddha, death is not a final line, but part of a vast, endless circle. It belongs to the cycle of samsara, the constant flow of birth, aging, death, and rebirth. There is no permanent self that dies, only a stream of conditions, ever changing, ever becoming. Just as a flame passes from candle to candle without being exactly the same, so too the illusion of I moves through lifetimes. To understand death for the Buddha is to first understand impermanence. The path of awakening, then, is not about avoiding death, but about waking up to the truth of life. The truth that all things arise and pass away, that clinging brings suffering, that freedom lies in letting go. To reach nirvana, the extinction of craving, the end of rebirth, one must look deeply into the nature of self and see that there is nothing fixed to preserve, no soul to save, no ego to defend, only a spacious awareness that sees clearly and rests in peace. For the awakened one, death loses its weight. It is no longer a threat, but a transition, like the passing of a season or the fading of a wave back into the ocean. To live without clinging is to die without fear, and to die without fear is to live each moment fully, without illusion, without grasping, and without regret. Martin Heidegger did not see death as a distant event, but as the very horizon of our existence. To be human, for him, is to be aware of our finitude, to know, even if we do not often admit it, that one day we will no longer be here. He called death the possibility of the impossibility of any further existence. It is the limit we cannot cross and still return. The moment when all our projects, identities, and masks fall away. It is where the noise of the world goes silent and only being remains. But Heidegger did not preach despair. He pointed to awakening. To live authentically, he said, we must face our mortality not as a curse, but as a teacher, a voice that reminds us, time is not infinite, meaning is not given, and no one else can live or die for us. This confrontation with death shakes us from distraction. It calls us back from the crowd, from conformity, from superficial living. It urges us to ask, am I living as myself, or as someone else's idea of me? To embrace death, for Heidegger, is to reclaim life. It is to live in full presence. Not tomorrow, not someday, but now. And in that awareness, there is no room for triviality. There is room only for what is essential, only for what is ours, truly ours, in the face of the inevitable. And perhaps that is the strange gift of death, to remind us of what it means to truly be. For Rumi, death was not an ending. It was a homecoming, a return to the beloved, a joyful release from the cage of the body into the boundless sky of the soul. He did not fear death. He welcomed it like a long-awaited guest. To him, this life was a temporary dress we wear, beautiful, yes, but not eternal. And in shedding it, we do not disappear, we awaken. In one of his most famous verses, Rumi calls death his wedding night, the sacred union between the soul and the source from which it came. Not a night of sorrow, but of celebration. Not loss, but fulfillment. The body returns to the earth. But the essence, the love, the flame, rises. For Rumi, death is not to be mourned, but to be honored. It is the soul's return to the divine dance. Rumi saw life and death not as opposites, but as movements within the same sacred rhythm. Just as the seed dies to become a tree and the wave dissolves back into the ocean, so too we die into love. To live well, he taught, is to love deeply, to live from the heart, without fear, without clinging. Then, when death comes, we do not resist. We rise, like flame, into the mystery from which we came. From Socrates to Rumi, each of these voices speaks to a different dimension of our relationship with death. One sees it as a gateway to truth, another as a liberation from illusion, a third as a call to authenticity, and the last as a reunion with love. They do not agree on what death is, but they all agree on what death does. It clarifies, it humbles, it strips away distraction and reveals what lies at the core of our existence. To reflect on death is not to worship darkness, but to return to the essential. It is to ask again and again, what truly matters? What remains when everything else fades? And in that quiet space, beyond fear, beyond denial, something shifts. Life becomes more vivid, time becomes more precious, and every breath, every gesture, every moment becomes sacred. If death is certain, then our relationship with it becomes one of the most important relationships of our lives. It is not a question of if, but of how. How do we meet our mortality? With denial, with fear, or with presence? We can begin now. Not by escaping the thought of death, but by integrating it, softly, honestly, gently. We can let it guide our priorities, let it simplify our desires, let it remind us to speak the words we keep postponing, and to forgive while there's still time. Socrates invites us to live with integrity, the Buddha with awareness and non-attachment, Heidegger with depth and authenticity, and Rumi with love, unguarded, overflowing, eternal. These are not distant ideals. They are paths we can walk step by step, moment by moment. And perhaps, by walking them, we can meet death not as an enemy, but as a quiet friend, reminding us that every ending is also a beginning. Which of these visions spoke to you most deeply? Was it the calm reason of Socrates, the luminous detachment of the Buddha, the raw clarity of Heidegger, or the burning love of Rumi? Leave your reflections in the comments, not just for us, but for others walking the same path. And if this journey moved something in you, consider subscribing. There is still so much to explore, so many questions worth asking, and we will walk through them together, in silence and in thought.